guest today is someone who's quietly become one of the most respected voices in leadership and commercial construction. Austin Tunnell is the founder of Building Culture, a company known for executing complex commercial projects and building systems that keep people thriving under pressure.
Which is insane because construction culture is historically powered by caffeine, fear, and a man named Rick who hasn't slept since 2009.
You realize the house we just built, my builder's name is Rick.
That I'm spot on. That is spot on.
Austin has built a company with high standards, real accountability, and leadership development baked into the operation. He's been transparent about mistakes, failures, and the hard decisions required to scale without losing your culture.
Translation, if you lead people and still think culture is just vibes, this man is about to legally challenge you.
Please welcome to the show, founder of Building Culture, Austin Tunnell.
Oh.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That was amazing.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
I love how much fun you guys have with this. This is awesome.
Yeah, good. Good.
Yeah. It's comes with having a Timmy.
Yeah. And by the way, that intro made me sound way too good. I'm still young, building a company, and mainly made just a bunch of mistakes, but starting to figure some things out. So.
Yeah, well, great. That's the whole point. I want you to feel like a rock star, and I want our listeners to be fooled. Okay, so
Yeah.
Okay, good.
but this is perfect because it leads me into before we get into the philosophy. Can you give us like a 5-minute origin story? That's something I'm really missing right now.
Okay, I'll do a fairly condensed origin story. I grew up in the suburbs of Houston, and I started my career at KPMG as an accountant back in 2011. My dad was an accountant, so I thought that was pretty practical. I'd go do that. So my degree was in accounting. I made it a whole 15 months before just quitting because I realized this is absolutely not what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do, but I know it's not this, and I'm miserable, and I'm not going to survive if this is what the rest of my life looks like. Right. When I was so desperate, I remember like I would just lay on the couch on Sundays and couldn't get up because I was so depressed. That's kind of the level it was. And of course I had no student debt. I had no student debt. I was living in a fine apartment near downtown, for my first year out of college, making decent money, $65,000. Had all like the things on paper, and I was like absolutely miserable, trying to go to church. And I'm like, I thought this, this is the whole thing that God's supposed to fix, of not being miserable. You know what I mean? I think this is the whole point, but I was miserable anyway. And so it was kind of this idea of, I just need to go explore. Like, I just remember that. And so I started Googling things like cool jobs, no joke, like cool jobs. And I found one, and one was in Panama, an internship you had to pay for. Like I had to pay money to go do it. So I quit my job, sold my car, moved down to Panama. My parents were really thrilled, after they had paid for my college. And I'd also applied for the Peace Corps, and it took a long time to get in. So while I was down in Panama, there was a couple important things here. As I was introduced when I was in Panama to this idea of traditional neighborhood design and kind of old ways of designing and building cities and how they used to be designed and built. And I also had met this master mason while I was down there. He's from the US, but he happened to be down there. I went off to the Peace Corps for 2 years, where first person I met off the plane is now my wife. She was another volunteer.
Nice.
So that was 2013 to 2015. But right before, I should have said this really quick. Right before I started at KPMG in Houston in 2011, I took a backpacking trip for 3 months around Spain and Portugal, because I had 3 months. I had this job lined up. I was like, I'll just go, spend all my savings and go do this trip. And I remember walking around Spain and Portugal, and I knew nothing about real estate, nothing about architecture. I didn't know what a hip roof was. And I just remember walking around being
roof, right? That's a really
groovy
roof.
Hip roof. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
This is incredible what these countries and these people have built. And this stuff isn't just, 50 years old. This stuff is 200 years old, 500 years old, 1,000 years old. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have the language for it, because when you grow up in an area and you just think this is the way things are. And, you're kind of taught America is the greatest country in the history of the world, and we're the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and we're awesome. And what I started to open my eyes to walking around there is, okay, there's a lot of incredible things in the US. Absolutely. Also, we are totally missing some things. I don't know what those things are, but something about this society and this culture tells me we have lost some things. And so that stuck with me when I was gone for 2 years in the Peace Corps, and I was reading about architecture and design and all these things. And I became convinced I really wanted to do this. And I realized development was the way to really shape the built environment, because they choose ultimately what happens. Developers do. But I didn't want to just, how did I get into it? I didn't have any money. I didn't know how to build. I didn't know anything about architecture. So I decided I really wanted to start from the ground up. And I had met a master mason when I was traveling who was literally building these incredible brick buildings, these triple wide, old school, pre-war buildings. And I called him up when I got back, had a 5-week engagement, got married, and asked if I could come down and work for him. And he had just moved to Oklahoma. And he said, I guess you could come down for a week. So drove down there with my new wife. This is 2015. Spent a week laying brick, digging ditches, all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the week, I said, so can I stay? He's like, oh, I guess. I said, can you pay me? He said, $12 an hour. I said, deal.
Nice.
After being in the Peace Corps, I was making no money, So we went back, picked up our stuff, moved down there, spent 2 years laying brick, building timber frame, putting on roofs, trim, all this stuff, and really learning. And I taught myself design while I was doing that, which I never thought was possible because I didn't think I was artistic. But when you're dealing with kind of traditional materials and you learn how they function and they work in compression, it starts putting parameters around what you can build and design. And people ask me how I taught myself design. I'm like, it's by looking at buildings I thought were beautiful and then just kind of wrapping my head around how to construct them and then designing something and then going and building it. So we launched Building Culture in 2017 as a design and build company, just me. And we were building homes, spec homes, custom homes. And then as we've grown the team, now we are a full-on licensed architecture company. I am not a licensed architect. We have a licensed architect on board. We do master planning of walkable communities. And then we've done small commercial projects, once again, custom homes, spec homes. But now we're moving into, I would say, vertically integrated real estate developers. And I'm the first to say I'm an emerging GP. This deal that I have is our first kind of big syndication. But this is kind of the future that gets me really excited to build a team around this, about being able to develop, design, and build the communities that we think we should be built to make the world better with values aligned investors. So that was kind of that might have gone over the 5 minutes, origin story, but
that was great.
Yeah. And that really sets up the next question I want to ask you, because as you're building culture, was there a moment early on where you realized, if I don't build this company differently, it's going to break me or everybody around me?
I don't think I even had the foresight to know I had to build the company totally differently. It's like taking the next step in front of you. And you also have this kind of like big vision, but you're just navigating your way through. And I would say each year the vision has gotten bigger about what's possible. And that's gotten really exciting. And so we're still figuring out day by day of like, how do we want to run this company and it be all the things, because building culture, like as your point, is got kind of a double meaning in terms of the building culture, the construction culture, but also building culture in our company, in our communities, in the country, all of that.
When it comes to the I just saw this YouTube video, which blew me away, of a guy going to all these really old buildings and he was and I'm curious if this is along the lines of what you're talking about, but he's looking at the beautiful architecture and the art of the design of these buildings. Like he's standing in the middle of, it's hard to describe. I'll throw up a picture of it here, but I want to send you this video. I think you'll love it. This place is gorgeous. Like the curvature, the staircase, the arches, the design. And it was an old sewage facility.
I know exactly what you're talking about, the one in England.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
That's right. It was
a sewage facility.
Right. And, the whole point of the video was like something is missing, right? Something has been lost. Exactly what you're saying. So what I was interpreting, because I just saw that like 2 days ago, that video, I was interpreting like more of the aspect of design and, what it looks like. Is that a part of what you're talking about when you're talking about building things a little bit differently and create, like, is that a part of what's missing or not? Or are you talking more about the culture?
Absolutely what you said. And so there's a couple things to touch on here. One of our favorite quotes we use at the company is from Winston Churchill. And he said, "First we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." And I think over the past 10 years or really 12 years of really kind of thinking and looking into this, I've become completely convinced that the built environment is the human habitat. We don't really think about it that way. We call it the built environment. We call it real estate. We call it, construction, all these things. We call it infrastructure. It is the human habitat. And when you think about it, the habitat of every living animal is incredibly important to its either thriving or not thriving. If you take a polar bear and take it out of its environment, it will die, and so people get whole degrees about how a polar bear thrives or how a tiger thrives or how whatever, a beetle thrives. But when it comes to human beings and the built environment, it's really not even on the radar. And beauty is absolutely an incredibly important piece of this. I really think about architecture like the ancients used to think about architecture as frozen music, because music is energy and light and waves. Like really, it's actually interacting with you and think. Well, they're discovering that buildings are too, just through geometry and the things they shape around them. And I'm getting a little bit like, don't mean to get too mystical there, but my point being is they took architecture really, really seriously. And the way I've learned to think about it is part art, part science, and buildings reflect the values of the people that built them. You can look at buildings and see the values that went into them. And if you drive around and look at most of what's been built in the past 100 years, particularly since World War II, it's like, what kind of values do we value as a society? And not only do the buildings reflect those values, they hold those values and reflect them back for generations to come. So there's a beauty aspect and there's also a durability aspect in that.
Yeah.
How many buildings do we build today will be here in 100 years, in 200 years, and 500 years? I would argue almost none in 200 years to 500 years. And buildings and architecture are memory, they're culture, they're reflections of people and history. And we're building things that end up in a landfill in 75 years. They're disposable. So we have like this part beauty, part durability, and then part kind of like lifestyle. And then how does it shape your everyday life, your everyday experience? Do people grow up isolated, or do they grow up with other people around in a community? Do we build places that just really work for giant corporate chains, or where local business ecosystems can thrive, where kids can run freely, or kids have to be scheduled to do everything at every moment because you have to get in a car to go anywhere to do anything? So, all of these pieces fit into this idea of the built environment. So I love what you said there, Timmy, about bringing it back to beauty.
Yeah.
Well, you're rolling, and I hesitate to stop you at all. But I had two thoughts. One is, when you were talking about like the impact of architecture, it made me think of when I took my family on that Chicago River architecture tour.
Yeah.
And it blew us away. I took my 3 teenage kids at the time, and they were enthralled. None of us have had a conversation in our lifetimes about architecture. It's just not something we care about, talk about, or whatever.
Right.
It certainly influences us when we're moved by it. And that's what kind of happened on the river there.
Yeah.
There's something about it that's deeper than just throwing a building up.
Right.
And it's structurally sound. The other thing that I'm going to butcher this. I don't even know if it's right, but I remember thinking, oh man, because I love process. I love systems. I love efficiency. I'm always like thinking in my mind about efficiency and stuff. And, you know, we had a conversation right before we started. I asked why the clock was 5 minutes fast. And you're like, what? That's what I do, you know? And you're like, are you going to be okay with that? It's like, yeah, I can be okay with that, you know, but where was I going with that? Oh, the quote was something about, the most disruptive thing is chaos. But the second most destructive thing is efficiency, like extreme efficiency. And I don't think destructive is the right word, but it's, you know, when it comes to like innovation and impact and all those things, it's like chaos just wrecks that stuff.
Yeah.
But extreme efficiency, like optimizing for efficiency,
right,
I think is what took us from what he described in Europe in these 500-year-old buildings that he's walking around and the environment that created versus what you will see in a suburban neighborhood now.
Right.
The
Little
difference
boxes.
is it's been optimized for efficiency and it's lost its soul, so to speak.
Right.
You know? And it made me think of, and I think this was you, Austin, you sent me, I think, the deal you referenced before. And I think in there was some images of like, this is what today's neighborhood looks like. It was like an aerial of a normal neighborhood, all the cookie cutter houses and all that stuff. And then you showed a rendering of what you guys have dreamt up to build and to create. And the difference is vast. I don't know if you want to do this or if you're ready to do this, but I wouldn't mind if you could throw those images up if you have them at the ready, because I think it really just gives a visual to what we're talking about.
Do you know what I'm picturing in my head right now? A neighborhood full of Mayan pyramids. In the middle of it, you've got the Roman Colosseum. And then, of course,
the Parthenon over there.
Yeah, the Parthenon. These beautiful little mini versions of that in the neighborhood.
Maybe we're not explaining ourselves well, Austin. I don't know.
No, I'm looking over here because I'm trying to pull up the just some images really quick because I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I've got it right here.
Sweet. While you're pulling that up, like what you said was like the values. The buildings show the values of the people who built them. And it's so like the thing I was thinking was like, that's what we see all the time in our neighborhoods and modern day is the value is efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Let's get it there. Let's get it up.
Fast, low cost.
Right.
Yeah, all that.
And Ryan, it's like those things can matter. It's not that those aren't important.
Sure.
You know, cost matters, you know, speed matters. But when you lose, as you said, Bo, like the soul of it and the why of what we're doing, I think is when, you know, it's just, okay, let me share my screen, where you really lose the heart of it. Let's see. So I'll start with,
Whoa.
So all we're doing here, and this is why, you know, because a lot of times there's can be an assumption when I start talking about building walkable neighborhoods or something that it's like, oh, they're trying to build Manhattan. Everything should be, you know, skyscrapers, density. And it's like, whoa. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about human scale, beautiful neighborhoods with diverse mix of housing in terms of you can have single family detached houses. You can have 4,000, 5,000 square foot houses, but you can also integrate 1,200 square foot houses and everything in between. You can have garage apartments. You can have little fourplexes. You can have live work units. You can have a little neighborhood center, and you can do that in a beautiful way that allows a completely different lifestyle. It allows you, imagine, just as you pointed out about the neighborhoods that are typically built today, if you make $400,000 a year, you're going to live in this neighborhood where all the houses are $400,000 to $450,000 and they're all 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath. If you want to live in a $700,000 house, you're going to live in this neighborhood way over here in a different school district probably, and you're going to have to pick up and move. And your kids move out of the house and you want to downsize, and then you're going to have to go to this part of town over here. And, you know, your college student, you know, graduating, they're going to be over here in some rentals. And it's like we've segregated and separated everything, like literally physically, with a physical barrier that you can't just like overcome with intention, you know, like, oh, we're going to intentionally live in community more or something. But that's not really how we were meant to live. And it's not that, you know, I think people sometimes get scared about the idea of like different price point houses living in the same community. But I would argue when it's done well, and it's not always done well, when it's done well, it actually helps lift the values of all the homes. Because if you live in a suburban neighborhood of all $350,000 houses, guess what you cannot do? You can't remodel your kitchen and make money selling it. You cannot add a new bedroom and sell it and make money because none of the comps in that neighborhood support it. So you'll literally lose money by taking care of your house, by upgrading the house, by building a garage apartment if you're even allowed. And so it kind of freezes everything in amber. And then as houses start kind of degrading, the wealthy people with money will move out. And then the people that don't move in, and then the house continues to degrade. So I really think that a lot of the stuff we built over the last 50 years, you're going to end up seeing it just degrade. Property taxes start going down, infrastructure stops being maintained, versus what I would call a more resilient community. So I'm starting with this image because this is kind of like, a suburban neighborhood street. We're not in a dense urban area here. This is 30 minutes outside Oklahoma City on a 200-acre parcel. We're not the developers. We're doing this for developers. These are beautiful single-family detached houses. We pulled the houses a little bit closer to the street to slow down cars, to shape space, to make it beautiful to walk. Everyone puts sidewalks everywhere, but if you don't have anywhere to walk and it's not beautiful and it's not safe, no one's going to walk. There's sidewalks by the Walmart, in the strip centers. Is anyone walking on them? Only the people that have no other option.
That's right.
Walkability. Let me go back one. So that's one area. Then this is another area of the community, and you can see that these are a little bit bigger. These are some small apartments, maybe some townhomes. Now, none of these are, giant apartment buildings. I would still call this human scale in that 2 to 3 stories, smaller buildings, smaller footprints, character, different ownership. And this is, like what a typical cottage court might look like, where you've got houses aligned on a park. And then something really cool is this is what we call a neighborhood center. And when you've got 200 acres, you can actually support a neighborhood center. And that doesn't mean, once again, big buildings and you're going to get tons of office. I live in the world of, business, and you actually have to make money, and it's nice to dream up things, but they actually have to work. But I've seen this actually work where you can have small commercial with, an apartment upstairs, or maybe this whole thing is a small office building, and small businesses can offset it there. This could be a coffee shop. This is a playground right here. I kind of, we make a joke, but are dead serious. If in a neighborhood center, you can get beer, tacos, coffee, and a playground, and a really beautiful space, you're set. People will want to go there. And if you make it comfortable for kids and families, suddenly everyone wants to be there. The problem with a lot of midtowns and kind of like, really hip places, I'm not saying there shouldn't be really hip places, but when you only build apartments and you don't build anything for families, only single people are going to live there, and that's going to be a very specific vibe, versus when you can actually make it very family friendly, and then everything just kind of like becomes more wholesome. And I live in a neighborhood that has something like this. And we're there with our little kids all the time. And guess what? Kids in high school are going on dates there too, and it's like, and then grandparents are there. And how many times places are like that, where you can get grandparents and kids and families and teenagers and college students all wanting to go to the same place. It's almost unheard of in the US. And so that's part of the power, just a little glimpse of when you start getting the hardware right. I called it architecture, the hardware. If it's the hardware, bad hardware can't run good software. It doesn't matter how good you can't run good software on bad hardware. So you have to get the hardware right. Now, I don't want to be like, think architecture is the end all be all. Just because you have great hardware doesn't mean you automatically have good software. People make up the software. You have to have people coming and being intentional, and you need people to pursue good and extend themselves and be generous and all that. That's part of a thriving place. But once again, if you don't get the barriers out of the way of kind of the way we built our built environment, it's really hard to have anything remotely like a thriving neighborhood community. So that's part of just what we're really passionate about at Building Culture.
Before, we'll circle back at the end, and if people want to learn more about what you guys are doing, we'll point them your way for sure. But what would you say like if you're going to create a list for, somebody like us who hasn't really thought about design and architecture in this way, what are like a handful, like if you're going to do the top 5 list of important characteristics of the type of neighborhood you just described, like at a high level, what would you say those things are?
He already said tacos, beer, coffee, playground.
For the neighborhood said, yeah. And by the way, and by the way, but like most people haven't thought about this, and it's not like no one's even taught this anymore. Like in schools, whether you're an architecture school or you went to construction management school or real estate school, we've completely lost this. And so I don't mean it in a shaking finger way at people and financing really incentivize all these other things. But to give you a kind of a list, I think a diverse range of housing. And, there could be different levels of diverse. I don't mean it has to be at the complete extreme ends. It depends on where you're building and what you're building, and not every location calls for everything.
I love this because it sounds like there's absolutely no HOA.
Actually, there are HOAs on most of these kinds of communities.
Oh, great!
But I actually... A well-run HOA, as much as they're a pain, I actually kind of like them because I like this idea of subsidiarity and local control and people getting together to manage their community. Obviously, they can go the wrong way, but in these places where you've got lots of shared parks, shared amenities, you need to have this kind of shared culture and stuff. And HOAs tend to always be a little bit of a pain, but also I think they can be done quite well. Anyway,
Nick was talking about that.
Yeah, that made me thinking. Yeah,
he made the comment like he'll never live in a neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA again.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's kind of okay.
Anyway, back to diversity.
So diverse housing. It needs to be walkable, and that doesn't mean. Usually that does mean some kind of sidewalks, but just having sidewalks isn't that. Those sidewalks, the walk also needs to be beautiful. There also needs to be somewhere to walk to. So there needs to be some kind of level of connectivity in the neighborhood. I would say civic spaces and public parks, but not parks left over, in the back corner by something where, the developer had leftover land and they checked the box that there's a park. You can actually celebrate the park and celebrate the civic moments, celebrate that town square kind of thing, where the gathering spot. And like I said, you don't need a whole lot to have a little center. It could literally be coffee, beer, sandwiches, and a playground. And that is enough. And if you can get that in some small offices, that can really do wonders for how many people are there and activated throughout the day. You can bring in outside people, right? You don't have to be insular or insulated. You can say like, we've got the best tacos in, this kind of radius. Come on in and throw a farmer's market on the weekends, host some concerts. Front porches often play a big role. They don't have to always, but front porches are amazing because when you start getting a little bit tighter density where houses are a little bit closer together, a little bit closer to the sidewalk, that porch really creates a transition from public space. You're walking along on the sidewalk and you have some steps up to your porch, and you can be sitting on your porch and people are walking by and you can kind of say hi, or you can not say hi, if you don't want to, if you're in a conversation, but it kind of allows this really loose connection. And the thing that I've learned from having lived in some of these communities and studying them and stuff is that community, as I used to think it was, isn't your best friends. It's great to have best friends. Everyone has best friends. Well, I hope everyone has best friends. And those are probably the people you spend most of your time with. Outside of that, if you don't actually live in a place where you can interact loosely with a lot of people on a, fairly regular basis, it doesn't have to be every day. How are you going to have community? So what I love about the neighborhood that we live in, that's, it has a lot of similarities to what I just showed you on the screen, is I walk to the mailbox. Instead of having a mailbox at my house, it's at this kind of like central place. And we just went out yesterday as a family, let's go get the mail. It doesn't take long, but like you get out of the house, you might see a couple people. I go to the coffee shop for meetings fairly regularly. I talk to the baristas rather than going through a drive-through at Starbucks, which don't get me wrong, I do that sometimes, but there's no value to that beyond the consumption and economic transaction when you're driving through a Starbucks or a Dutch Brothers or whatever it is. When you actually have a local business and you're seeing them once, 2 times, 3 times a week, there is a connection there. And I think those small relationships are actually really important and create this identity, shared culture, seeing other people as humans, because your best friends are probably going to be the people that share all your values or most of your values, right? You might disagree on certain things, and some of those things might be important. But when you actually have ways to interact with people that are really kind of like small, loose, but you see each other as, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. How was that? You know, I heard you just, how's your kid doing or whatever it is. It creates bonding where you don't have to be best friends to have very positive relationships and maybe even water their plants sometime. Who knows, you know, depending on kind of the level of that. So I just like all these opportunities that it creates. And I forgot how I even got going on this tangent. So you'll have to bring me back.
Oh, no, it was good. You were talking,
the diversity of housing.
Oh, yeah, kind of the different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, what makes one of these communities.
Right,
you know?
that's right. Yeah. But there was a list of 5 things that would, you know, make these communities, I think was the thing. But yeah.
This is a great book. This is what I read 12 years ago, and it kind of blew my mind because it was like, I got back and I read this book and it kind of described why the world looks the way. Suburban Nation
for our listeners.
And it's so good because it describes why the world looks the way it does in the US today. And what to do about it too. It's not just a hopeless book. And it's not that a lot of people think that the way the world looks in the US, the built world, is because of capitalism. And I think young people often say this because they want to blame capitalism. You know, It's just greedy developers, blah, blah, blah. No, it's just people following incentives. And we've basically made illegal a lot of the stuff I'm talking about over the past 50 years, 60 years with zoning, with parking minimums, with easements, with all these kinds of things that I would just call bad regulation. And so just by removing some of those things, which is starting to happen, and then having developers and investors say, hey, we want to build these kind of communities. That's also how you start shifting policy because no one's pushed on it before. You know, I mean, there's a group of people, the New Urbanists, that kind of wrote this book. They've been working on policy shifts and things for the past 40 years or so, and have made a lot of headway, but there's still a long ways to go.
You know, he was talking about best friends.
Yeah.
You know, and your best friends, generally you share values and all that stuff. And what this type of community that he's describing is, it puts you in contact with a diverse group of people.
Yeah.
Not your best friends, people that have differing point of views. And I was just thinking, you know, if we had more of that in America, we might have a lot less of this just my team versus your team, complete policy and political division and all that stuff.
Polarization.
Yeah. I mean, I could see these types of communities having a ripple effect in relationships and in public policy and in all this stuff.
Yeah, because we're not only is there a physical segregation, but online, we're all in our own bubbles.
Oh yeah,
as well. You know,
they segment you online, but what the beauty of what he's talking about is to create a beautiful space where you're not online.
That's
you're
right.
Actually living life.
That's right.
In close proximity to other people.
Right.
That you can interact and build relationships with, and
now, Austin, I'd imagine that there's a line of architects outside your office wanting to work with you, because you know it's not. I think of the show Weeds. I don't know if you all saw that. But
I know what you're talking about, but I never watched it.
Yeah, but the opening title sequence was a bunch of houses that all looked the same, right? And it was like little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside. They all look just the same. There's a red one and a blue one. And you know, there's just the suburbs, right? They all look the same. When my wife and I were looking at buying a house, there were several places where you can go and they have model houses. You walk in there, and then in the neighborhood, there's like that selection of those kind of houses, right? And it's not like a bad neighborhood, but it's missing for us, the art, right? Which I think is a big part of culture. But it's missing that aspect. So with what you're describing, it sounds like there is more freedom for an architect to express themselves. Is that, would I be right in what I'm saying, or no?
I think And yet, the way I think about it partially is that it's expanding the lens of design, because right now in most of these communities that you're talking about, someone comes in, bulldozes trees, divides up the lots, and then, just selects house plans, and maybe an architect can do, a house. These communities, kind of the whole thing is designed where the buildings in some ways become a little bit more of a backdrop. Like it's really funny how US culture can make its way into architecture where it's all about the house. It's all about the building. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be sometimes, or that once again, we don't want those things to be beautiful, but the greatest cities in the world. Now today we would think it's very nice architecture, but the greatest cities, take Florence, for example, in Italy, the most of the buildings become background buildings, and they're shaping space. Now, if you stop and you look at one, you're like, wow, that's really nice. But really they're guiding as you walk through the streets or drive through the streets, you're guiding what you're seeing. They're shaping the space. And then there's punctuation. The punctuation is the Grand Cathedral, the Civic Building, the tower, whatever it is. And it's pulling you into it. And so, you might only need 1% punctuation to have an amazing city. And so it's not that I don't think the background buildings don't matter. They do matter. You don't want bad background buildings. But one of my favorite, someone told me a while ago, he said, the problem isn't that houses are cookie cutter. It's that they're bad cookies. Everyone likes cookies. As in, his point being, when you get the urban design right, when I say urban design, I don't mean high density, I just mean spatial. When you start getting the neighborhood right, the ingredients themselves don't have to be utterly spectacular. Yes, you want them to be beautiful, but then the landscaping really matters because you're a little bit closer to the landscaping as you're going through, and kind of like everything works together. So getting back to your original question, architects do love working on this because it's a larger design. You're designing a mosaic rather than just a little piece. And so it's but very few people are trained to do this or think this way now. There are some schools out there teaching it, which is wonderful, but it's rare.
I've never once thought of buildings as a backdrop, but what you just described explains why there's vibes downtowns, especially these older small town downtowns like ours. We live in Owensboro, Kentucky, about 100,000 people in the area. And you go downtown, there's energy there, and it's because the space is shaped by these buildings that most of them are attractive to beautiful, but they create the background, and it creates this energy and this vibe, and especially when it's full of people, and we've done a much better job over the last 10 years filling it up with people. It's just a fun place to be.
Yeah.
And, there are people that want to live down there. People want to work down there. You want to spend time down there on the river on the weekends and stuff. And it's just kind of, but I've never thought of the fact that the buildings are the background for all that.
That's right. Yeah. Did you read the book Devil in the White City?
No.
My wife read it. She was, I know what it's about, but I haven't actually read it, but I've been told to read it.
Yeah, so there are two stories that happen here. One of them is H.H. Holmes, the serial killer that opened up like a hotel and was killing people during the time of the World's Fair in Chicago. I think it was around like 1870s.
This is true story.
This is true story.
Okay.
Right? But at the same time, you've got an architect and a designer named Burnham. Daniel Burnham, I think is his name. I'll look at that up in a second. But I think that was, and it was about designing the World's Fair, right? And really, it was more than this is where the Ferris wheel was invented. This is where our modern day streets and street lights were designed. Pabst Blue Ribbon got their blue ribbon. And it really delves into the story of the serial killer while at the same time designing what our modern cities look like now, or how they operate, right? Because a lot of what you're describing in these pictures remind me of these neighborhoods in Chicago. I lived in Chicago for 12 years, and our neighborhood was very much like you were describing.
Yeah.
And some areas aren't, but when you go downtown and in the design of the parks and whoever, maybe it was Daniel Burnham, they brought in the guy who designed Central Park in New York. And you know, it's like that's what they were doing at the time, what you're describing. That, again, seems completely lost on the new stuff that we're building. But
what's the name of that book again?
The Devil in the White City. It is, I read it when I was on the ship. I don't read books that much, but when you don't have internet, or you're got so much time, it's like, okay, let's read a book. And I'm glad I read that one. It was great. It's a great book. It's a great book.
Timmy was a performer on a cruise ship.
I was literally wondering. Okay,
that's why he was stuck on the ship. Yeah, we didn't throw him in a container ship and send him across or anything.
How many months was that?
I did 2 contracts. Both were 4 months.
Wow.
So 8 months total, because I did them back to back.
That's a long time.
Yeah, it was a long time. And ship life, it seems like it's where I met my wife.
Really?
Yeah, she's from Ireland. So I've spent a ton of time since then. That was in 2014-ish. I spent so much time since then in Europe and seeing all this beauty and this culture and this history and these buildings that are way older than America.
Oh,
even is, right? It's crazy. So this, I love this episode so far. It's different. Most of the time, we're talking, other things that are important, like efficiency, but not just that, but, and I love nerding out about this and seeing the passion.
By the way, I found the quote about chaos and efficiency.
Oh, what is it?
It was close. There's actually 2 of them that are pretty close. One is, chaos is not a strategy, and blind efficiency is not a virtue. One destroys direction, the other destroys judgment. And then the other one is, an organization ruled by chaos and obsessed with efficiency will get the wrong things done faster.
Oh,
that's interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, anyway, not exactly what I was thinking when I said it, but anyway.
Yeah.
Just so I don't misquote somebody.
Let's move real quick. Unless you have something you're sitting on, I want to ask about. We're kind of circling back to where we started, right? You are building a team, hiring people. You have to lead. I just got off a movie set, and the director and the guy who wrote the movie is a good friend of mine, but he has this incredible talent of sharing his vision and getting people on board. And that vision becomes the group's vision. And then you make something incredible. Or you try, it's incredible to you.
Yeah.
Right. And you hope that other people, think it's incredible. This one will be, by the way. It's good. So being the one who's spearheading this up, and you're talking about how you're learning right now about hiring, and hiring not only competency, but shared values, and taking the time to do that. When you going through that process, do you know what's the thing that stands out of like, oh, this person I definitely want on my team, and that seems so hard to find, that hopefully after this comes out, you've got a few really great candidates. Who are you looking for?
That is a good question. I think I think it's changing on a case by case and position by position thing. We're learning that you can hire some positions remotely. A superintendent can't be hired remotely, and I think one of the positions we're looking for next to kind of me step out of construction more, and another one of my partner to kind of step out of the day-to-day construction more so we can work on growing the business more, is we need to get a really good superintendent. This person needs to have 10 years of experience and be, a little bit of a bulldog, but not too much of a bulldog, you know, because you need to be able to hold people to account and say, no, that's done wrong, rip it out. But also to be respectful and appreciate good work and, you know, all that. So it's hard. I'm still figuring it out on the personnel side. I will say, because of some of the work we've done, we do get inquiries to come work for us. I wouldn't say we've hired a ton of those inquiries yet, but I'm hoping that with some of our upcoming projects that are a little bit kind of larger scale, and when I say larger scale, the one we're working on is just an acre. But when you are building in an urban environment, we're fitting 18 townhomes and 2 live works and 13,000 square feet of commercial. And it's going to be incredible because it's not just one big building. It's all these courtyards and spaces to wander through. It'll feel very European, but I don't mean that we're just copying something from Italy and, you know, plopping it here. It's going to feel very kind of like some not odd, but like Midwestern. I want it to feel Oklahoman. And I think we'll get more opportunities with people as we continue to do these cool projects, because it resonates with people. It resonates with so many people of building more beautiful, humane, dignified places. Even if you don't get to live there, but you get to go by it or visit it or have coffee there or whatever it is. People are really, I think, starting to realize how ugly our modern world is. And also how isolating it is. You know, one of the statistics I quote a lot is that 74% of Americans report a sense of non-belonging in their own community. That was just from a couple of years ago. Like 3/4 of Americans report a sense of non-belonging in their own community. At the same time, it's not surprising at all after what we've just talked about how neighborhoods are actually designed and built. But I think we can shift that.
Right. When you said building community, kind of has 2 meanings. One is literally building a community that people can live in and be a part of. And the other side of it, what I interpreted was like building culture.
Yeah.
So building culture was building culture within your company.
Yeah, and okay, so let me expand on that just a moment, because building culture in this, I'm so thankful for this name. It turned, I mean, I knew at the moment I heard it. My sister actually came out with this, I don't know, 11 years ago or so, 10 years ago. And I was just like, that's it, you know? Yeah. And it's just turned out to be like more and more true each year or something. But so there's the construction culture. When I say building culture, the building culture, and that we're losing good designers, we're losing good, trades. I hear this from people all the time, other GCs, developers, like, we don't have people that know how to do this anymore, as in these things are dying. And then kind of just the culture around building, from the way it's financed, the way it's banked, the way that investors think, all of these things. But on the flip side, and the regulatory culture, around real estate. So there's that side. But what I've increasingly come to appreciate is that is 50% of the equation. You could get rid of all the barriers, the regulatory barriers, get the incentives right, get a bunch of trades that know masonry. You only have 50% of the equation. The other 50% is quite literally the culture in America, in your state, in your own community of people that appreciate beauty, of people that want to, make life better, that value quality over quantity, that it's not just about consumption and I'm going to sell my house in 5 years, so I don't care what happens. There's a culture, I think, that I'm increasingly appreciated, kind of on the consumer side, if you were to say, of a culture that really brings about, because that's the good thing about capitalism, it responds to demand. And so one thing to do if you want to see more beauty and more walkable neighborhoods is for people to start wanting it and start asking for it and start advocating for it. And I guarantee you the supply side, is going to come in and help. So I think there's a both and. It's not, I don't just shake my finger or something at those real estate developers. They're the problem. It's like, hold on. You're just as much as the problem. We're just as much as the problem on the consumer side as on the, the supplier side or the builder side. And so it's a both and. And so that culture piece is just really interesting, and you can do it at different levels, both at the national level and the state level. But once again, also just in your local community is really where it happens, I think. And culture can shift.
Yeah.
I wonder if you've had these kind of conversations. Maybe not because your kids are so much younger than mine.
Yeah.
But I bet you will. And Austin, I'd be curious because what you just described was essentially American culture. If it were to shift and demand something different, the supply would deliver it. The supply would do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, the incentives at that point would be aligned to, hey, want more sidewalks and green space and beauty? Like, it would be delivered if that's what people wanted, right? Mm-hmm. But the reality is we've got this culture that's over here. What you're trying to do is different. You're trying to affect the culture starting with one specific chunk of dirt and creating like, this is what's possible, and ideally continue that over and over and over again and start to move the needle. But as that idea relates to families, like I was just thinking when you were describing that I've never really framed it this way, but this is essentially what happens is, one of my kids will come home and they've got an issue at school or something. There's conflict. And we have this conversation that says, look, the world, the American culture would tell you this is the response. But like, there's a better way. There's a better response to that thing. And so we've had the opportunity to have these conversations with our kids over the years that says, look, this is what normal looks like. And it's really not great. And there's a better way, and those conflicts always become teaching moments if you look for those things. And I've done that as a dad. My wife certainly has as well. And our parents did that, with us growing up. But I don't know that I've done that in business a whole lot, or, broadly speaking, or what you're trying to do, Austin, with actually affecting the building culture, that's very ambitious. It's exciting. It's super interesting. I'd like to jump in the time machine and see how you've been able to move the needle like 15 years from now. We'll have to have you back on and see, because it's ambitious.
Yeah.
And it is exciting.
Awesome. Will you translate that little laugh I heard?
Which laugh?
The one that you just did when he talked about it's got to be like the amount of ambition. Yeah.
Oh, it's funny because it's like, you're right. The vision is totally ambitious. And I don't mean like,
look, ambitious.
I've been punched in the face and the stomach enough to what would you call it? I am a lot less prideful than I was 10 years ago or 5 years ago because I've nearly gone bankrupt, lost my business, and I'm always aware of more pride because it's always lurking. But I think you're right in that my vision's only grown. And actually, in some ways, there's more confidence about the vision, but it's not like I recognize the vision is well beyond me in my lifetime or just what we can do in our company. And so I've been thinking about what that means. But I think it's cool to have a big vision because it's really the guide, the guiding star or something, and you're heading toward, it's the way to orient yourself. So I use it to orient ourselves where we're going. And the journey is infinite, and it's supposed to be infinite. And that's something that I've learned to appreciate more over these past 5 years with just some pretty hardships between business and some even health things. And recognizing it's not the destination, which I've always wanted it to be growing up. When can I get this thing and then be happy and not have to fight, worry about it anymore, whether that was money or success or whatever it is. And well, thankfully, none of those things came to me. So I had to, one day I still remember being like, I'm going to have to learn to be happy in my current circumstances, or I recognize I'll never be happy. And that was kind of a scary thought. And it was like, well, can I learn to be happy in my current circumstances? And And the answer was actually yes when I started to kind of like let go of something. I don't even know exactly what control maybe of we're doing this and all. So it's funny that like in some ways my vision is bigger than it's ever been. And then also I hold it loosely, not in a way that I don't take it deadly serious and that it's actually really values that are kind of guiding, but also learning more and more to enjoy the journey of it and then the relationships along the way. And really the way to achieve this vision isn't us building culture, going and building all of America. That's not possible, but it is relationships, it's conversations, and it's all kinds of people across the country doing these things. And I learn from people all the time. And so it's starting to feel just fun to me. And I do look forward to the next decade, but that's why I laughed.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Yeah. Well, I've got a, I guess, how can people help you on your vision? What can people do? You've got a podcast, Building Culture Podcast.
Yeah.
Where else can people follow you? What else can people do if they hear this and they're like, I got to be a part of this?
Yeah. Well, to follow us, the Building Culture Podcast, which I just took a 6-month break, but I'm starting again next week, I think. You can follow the Building Culture Podcast on Spotify, Apple, all those things. And then you can follow me. I probably post most like directly my thoughts on X at Austin Tunnell, or even LinkedIn, but X I kind of post a little bit more. But in terms of
mispronouncing his name the whole time.
Did you hear that?
Everyone does, and I don't really care that much. So, you know, it's
Tunnell.
Tunnel with 2 L, so it's Tunnell.
I hate doing
I
that.
see. Tunnell.
It's very occasional that someone says it, you know, right. I think my parents really took issue with it. They'd always be like, it's Tunnell. And so I was like, I'm never doing that. But if like these things interest someone listening, there are some great ways, because whether you are in architecture, you're in construction, you're a trade, you're in real estate, you're in finance, or you are outside of all of these things, but still care a lot about it, there are so many ways to learn, to kind of get involved, and literally to make a difference. And one of the things is, I mean, I pulled up that book, Suburban Nation. That is a really good book. There's a couple other really good ones. Christopher Alexander is an amazing, I think he recently died, but he was one of my inspirations. Christopher Alexander and Leon Creer, to kind of like educate yourself a little bit. But then there's groups and organizations, and none of them are perfect. You know, none of them I would say, go follow these guys. And, you know, I agree with 100% of what they do and say and all that. But there is the CNU, Congress of the New Urbanism, and they have an annual gathering every year of architects, real estate developers, contractors, urban design. It's really architect and urban design heavy, but there's real estate developers, and I don't go every year. I will go this year, I think, because it's in Arkansas and I can drive, but that's annual. Congress of New Urbanism. You can go to their website and look. There's strong towns. Chuck Marone has written some great books. One of them is called Strong Towns, and he really looks at what I'm talking about from a financial perspective for cities. So for people managing cities, because suburban sprawl is actually not profitable. It relies heavily on more growth. And the moment the growth stops, you can't actually support the infrastructure because the property taxes don't actually pay for all the extra miles of sewer and all the extra miles of highway and how far the fire trucks have to go. So he looks at it from a financial lens. So Strong Towns is really good. And they also have an annual gathering. Those are two really good organizations, and there's more. And I've got stuff on my podcast and stuff that probably mentions a bunch more that I'm not thinking of right now. And there's probably some of these local chapters in your community if you're in a bigger city, whether it's ULI, Urban Land Institute, and they're starting to get a little bit more in this area. I wouldn't say totally. And then you can always reach out and ask. You can email podcast at buildingculture.com, and I'll try to give you any resources I can.
I want to listen to your podcast. I love this. And I know Tara will too, my wife. She'll love this. What will I get from your podcast? Is it talking about kind of what we talked about here?
I actually interview, I think we've got 45 because I wasn't doing it like weekly. I was doing one every 2 weeks, but I've interviewed really diverse range of guests to take a pretty, broad view of this, where I talk to urban designers, I talk to architects, I talk to real estate developers and investors. There's one of them on social science. She does neuroscience and architecture, and they're like measuring people's eyes, people's sweat and heart rate as they walk through different environments, as they walk through a parking lot versus this. That's a really interesting one. It says something about like neuroscience and architecture on the episode. So a really broad range of kind of things to just help. It's a way for me to learn, you know, and I think because cities are highly complex, we've tried to reduce them to just complicated, you know, but you can understand complicated and, you know, it's a very industrial way of thinking about something of let's just turn it into a factory. We're going to separate out everything and it's all the same ingredients. So it all must work the same way. But it's like, no, cities are ultimately people and people are ultimately complex, and you can understand patterns and things, but you can't just like break it out in an assembly line that work the exact same way. So that's part of the reason I diverse. And really, city building is you got to care about economics. You got to care about design. You got to be able to build it well. You got to be able to make money doing it. You got to be able to raise money. You got to be able to get through regulations, entitlements, and all these other things. So it takes a lot of different things to do it well.
That's right.
That is the little secret behind podcasting, though. And he said it, and it's so true. It's like we learn so much doing it. We act like we're educating the listeners, but man, we're really just learning from great people with incredibly interesting perspectives and a lot of experience. And you just gave us a bunch of that.
That's what I do. So I'm glad. I appreciate you having. Could I say one more thing? It's something I haven't.
Oh yes.
It was just something that as I'm talking to you guys, it's come to mind. I've never really said it out loud because, well, I was just reading about it and it's just been really interesting. I've been reading a book on the Medicis in 15th century, 16th century Europe, because Florence was really the heart of the Renaissance. And so I've been increasingly interested because I've talked about a new Renaissance in architecture in America and all that. And finally I was like, well, maybe I should actually look into how that actually happened in the past.
Sure.
And it was so fascinating. I knew some of these things, but not all of them. So much of what started the Renaissance, which, you know, that can be translated as rebirth, was the
Florence,
the recognition that they were really just coming out of the Dark Ages, and they were still kind of in the Dark Ages after the fall of the Roman Empire, you know, in 400 whatever AD, and then you kind of go into the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages and the late Middle Ages.
The bubonic plague.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things. And then, you know, there's ancient Rome, there's these things around, but there's all this lost knowledge. People didn't even care about ancient society and ancient Rome and the ruins. And during the early Renaissance, right when the Medicis were kind of like starting to gain influence and power, there was all this interest suddenly about like, what was Plato saying? What was, you know, and they were starting to do excavations in Rome and looking at the Pantheon and being like, we've never built anything like this for 1500 years. How was this built? We've completely forgotten. And ultimately, what kind of, and this is my interpretation, what inspired it was a recognition that there was a society once greater than their own. And then that birthed a curiosity in them, a hunger for learning, of rediscovering this old knowledge, but integrating it with the new knowledge and what they have now to find a new way forward. It wasn't just like, well, let's just copy what the Romans did, but it was this humility, like an actual humility. Because I'm realizing we think in America, we're at the highest, you know, point in human civilization. And I think that's just what you think, because guess what? We've got phones that, you know, can communicate in space, and we can, you know, send rockets onto the moon. And we live in an unbelievable time. So it's so easy to think we're just at the height of human civilization. And I'm sure they thought the exact same thing, but it was actually looking back and actually looking and seeing, oh my gosh, we're missing some things. And then they started looking. And so it was this curiosity that guided them, and kind of this openness to wanting to know the truth of things and the true matter of things. And I just found that, I don't know, I found it really, really inspiring.
You know what else happened right about that time in Florence that I think supercharged what you're describing? Is they created what America enjoys today, and that is the common currency.
Yeah.
The florin. And I've been reading this book by David McWilliams called The History of Money.
Oh, I know
And he
that book.
talks a lot about this. Really interesting about what happened in Florence because they had the currency that everybody trusted and wanted. And so all this curiosity ended up being funded.
Yeah.
And there wasn't, the Dark Ages really didn't have, you bartered and you traded, but commerce essentially started in the Renaissance in Florence and funded all of this.
Yeah,
stuff.
kind of modern capitalism really started. And I know exactly what you were talking about the florin. It was like the gold. They called it coin clipping before them, which was their version of inflation. Here's a Roman coin, and you start clipping it or putting different metals in it, and it's not actually the same amount. It's literally inflation versus the florin, which they actually create very consistent. They weren't clipping coins. They weren't putting other metals in. So it was trusted, and you could trade it everywhere. And so, as you said, they became really wealthy. And not only did they fund it, like were they able to fund it because of the wealth, which America has a lot of wealth. What I was so blown away by too is just like the actual patronage of people, wealthy people investing in artists and buildings and public good. And by the way, they made a lot of money, and even these things that are like altruistic, it's still, when you're a patron, and you support an artist, the success of the artist also reflects back on you. And I don't mean in a selfish way, I mean in a good way. Like when you support someone and they go do something great, it's not saying, look what I did, but also like that kind of lifts everyone up. And so just speaking of the Renaissance, that idea of some patronage, and I'm not saying, give away to 501c3s. I'm actually pretty skeptical of that kind of stuff because it takes away responsibility and all this. But this idea among wealthy people in the US of, what if we were to invest in our own communities? Yeah, I could go invest in this hedge fund over here or go do this. I'm not saying you should never do that. But what if it was like, what would it look like to make our city great?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And support independent film.
Yeah.
I mean, it is.
Way to bring it back to what's really important.
Yeah. No, this is fascinating. It's crazy. When we walked in here, I thought we were going to be talking a little bit more about the work environment culture, right? Mm-hmm. Which is not really what we talked about. Mm-mm. It's bigger and it's more beautiful, in my opinion, and way more fun to talk about, in my opinion. And thank you for coming in and sharing this. And, there's this, have you ever heard, there's a term called monoculture, where that's something that we're missing nowadays, specifically when it comes to entertainment. Like back in the 2000s, everybody was watching this one movie, right? Because the selection was not as vast. You go to the theater to go see the movie, and then everybody would talk about it at the water cooler or whatever. Mm-hmm. We're really missing that in culture now with the boom of all the content that is out there. And sometimes you got an outlier but the Barbie movie or Oppenheimer, that was kind of a monoculture moment. But I just saw a video about this as well. And I'm just seeing all these parallels, and it seems, I don't think it's a mistake that I'm seeing more people talk about these kind of things of culture, people being bonded around these, whether it be a community or neighborhood, or watching similar things. It doesn't matter what my belief is or what your belief is, where we disagree. We can all share in something together, which creates culture, right? And ultimately, it builds culture.
That's a good way to end.
There we go. Way to land the plane there.
Right on the nose.
Yeah. Improv, you just keep going and it'll come. Just trust it'll come. Austin, thank you so much.
Yeah,
it's been incredible.
Great episode. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Timmy, great to talk to you guys. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
You got it, man. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
All right.
That's Austin Tunnell, founder of Building Culture. If you got value out of this episode, do us a huge favor. Do all the things podcasters ask you to do.
Yeah. Reviews help more than you think. Algorithms are fragile creatures. They need encouragement.
You can also watch the full episode on YouTube and follow us on all the social platforms.
And if you're new here, welcome. This is Commercially Speaking, where we talk real business and occasionally yell about leadership.
One more thing.
Barbara Corcoran, if you're listening, watching, scrolling, or accidentally auto-played this while looking at a beach condo, we would love to have you on the show. We're fun, we're somewhat respectful, and Bo promises to fly you out, put you up, or fly us out, or put us up.
Wait, what?
Barbara, call us. I got your phone. I got your phone right here. This is Barbara's phone. You can call us anytime. Everyone else will see you next week. Bye, Alice.
Bye, Alice.
Bye, Bridget.
Bye.